think they got any chance to win the series. They might win 2 games.
That's all.
That's all.
Well, I watched them work out this morning, and the Russians are real good skaters, but I think the Canadian boys will take them.
I think the Russians going to win it.
Team Canada, 74. The underdogs with the Canadian public and the press. Selected players from the World Hockey Association. The National Hockey League and its players said no when Hockey Canada invited them to join forces. Team Soviet 74. The very best players in the entire USSR. A country where there appears to be no conflict of interest when it comes to icing the strongest possible team, when so much sporting prestige is internationally at stake. It's Canadian hockey versus Soviet hockey. The founders versus the refiners. It's truly hockey versus hokey. Prime Minister Trudeau and Soviet Deputy Chairman of Sport, Georgy Regulsky, shared the ceremonial face-off duties. In just a moment, we'd find out if Team Canada 74, whose players went to their Edmonton training camp only 16 days before, could cope with the mighty Soviet hockey machine.
It's kind of a different atmosphere here. There's not as many players. I think everybody's going to get a good chance here, and everybody's going to be in better condition, I think, than we were the last time. And I think we know what to expect now. Most of us, everybody's been watching them for years, and I don't think we'll underestimate them this time.
Frank Mahovlich played in 1972 when Canada defeated the Soviets in a dramatic 8 games. So did defenseman Pat Stapleton.
We have the experience of being able to look back at what happened in the last series and being able to study the movies. Going into the last series, it was like playing an unknown team, or an unknown quantity. And as it turned out, it took a while to adjust.
Even the intervention of Prime Minister Trudeau couldn't make this next fellow eligible with the NHL Team Canada of 1972.
I don't think I've ever been to a camp where I've seen a greater group of guys with a better attitude than I have right here in Hockey Canada. It's just been fantastic, and if attitude means anything, and I know we all know it means a great deal, we're certainly going to be ready.
Nobody doubted their attitude. The question was, how could Team Canada be in shape, in condition to skate with these well-prepared Soviets after only 16 days of training camp? The Soviet lineup had several familiar names. Forwards, Valery Kharlamov, Boris Mikhailov, Alexander Maltsov, Alexander Yakushev, and goalie Vladislav Kretiev, players who'd won the utmost respect of Canadian hockey in recent years. Team Canada's most notable names included Jerry Cheevers in goal, Pat Stapleton on defense, along with veteran J.C. Tremblay, and up front, Paul Henderson, the previous Canada-Russia series scoring hero, Bobby Hull, and Frank Mahovlich, Ralph Baxter, and a 46-year-old miracle man, Gordie Howe. It's the second period now, with Canada leading 2-1, and number 17, Valery Kharlamov, scores one of the most spectacular goals of the entire series. Here's that patented Kharlamov deke again. A remarkable goal by a remarkable player who earlier in the game had a spectacular collision with Rezhan Houl. In recent years, there's been much talk about new and different Soviet tactics, but very little explanation. That's one reason why Hockey Canada arranged to film this series, using full-zone camera coverage. Later in this film, we'll take a careful look at Soviet strategies. Into the third period now, the Soviets leading 3-2. But number 16, Bobby Hull, ties the game and sends this Quebec crowd into ecstasy. The Colisée was enraptured. Here was Team Canada 74, outskating and outshooting the Soviets in the third period when everybody predicted they'd run out of gas. With just about half a minute to play, number 27, Frank Mahovlich, had an excellent try for the winning goal. The game ended 3-3, a fitting wind-up to a well-played match, played in a style in line with Health and Welfare Minister Marc Lalonde's luncheon remarks to the two teams the day before.
Les relations entre le Canada et l'Union soviétique durant les dernières années ont connu une expansion sans précédent.
The relations between Canada and the Soviet Union during recent years has known an unprecedented expansion. And there is no doubt that sport is an element extremely important in the development of these relations. In the last few years, we've had the pleasure to receive representatives of the USSR in a number of sports, not only hockey. And these competitions that took place in Canada and Russia have contributed greatly in cementing the friendly relations between our two great nations.
So in conclusion, I will only say to both teams, on behalf of the government of Canada and on behalf of all Canadians, best of luck to you all, and we stand behind both teams.
Game 2 was in Toronto, and this standing ovation was for the inspirational Gordie Howe. Tonight, his 19-year-old son, Mark, was in the Team Canada lineup too, and father and son, together with Ralph Backstrom, opened the scoring with a beautiful passing play. The puck goes from Mark to Gordie, back to Mark to Backstrom. Here it is. Who says Canadian players have forgotten how to pass? The Howes and Backstrom emerged as Team Canada's most consistent forward line over the balance of the series. Face-offs was one area where Team Canada dominated the Soviets throughout the 8 games. And Andre Lacroix wins this one, and then is right in position to make it 2-0 for Canada. In the second period, with the score 3-1 for Canada, Vladimir Petrov scored a goal that hardly anybody saw. As we see it again, the puck was in and out in a fraction of a second. This would have made it 3-2 and may have affected the eventual outcome. Canadian referee Tom Brown, however, did not see the goal. When he consulted with the goal judge, who had put the red light on, the goal judge showed some hesitation, and so Brown ruled no goal. While on the subject of officiating, a certain amount of chippy play crept into this game. Players weren't always stopping on the whistle. Four to 1 was the final score. Team Canada took a 1-game lead in the series. And as the two teams jetted to Winnipeg for Game 3, a lot of people who'd predicted the Soviets would win all 8 games were busy rewriting their scripts.
I think we'll win it all.
Oh, I think they've got a real good team. You can't beat Bobby Hull and Cheevers and Gordie Howe, and Stapleton's fantastic.
These are guys that are really working together, and I think we're going to win all the games.
Don McLeod took over in goal for Team Canada this night. One of 5 lineup changes gambled on by coach Billy Harris. And Team Canada fired 5 goals. Bruce McGregor, Tom Webster, Ferguson. Henderson again. And Serge Bernier. But the Soviets bombarded McLeod with a barrage of 8 goals. Alexander Yakushev, Boris Mikhailov, Vladimir Petrov, Alexander Maltsev, Vladimir Shadrin, Alexander Vodanov, Yakushev again, and Yuri Lebedev. It was number 15, big Alexander Yakushev, who really got the Soviets into orbit in this game. This sequence from Game 2 shows the concentration and discipline of this great Soviet star. Nothing can deter him from his task. Later in the series, Bobby Hull, a player who should know, called Yakushev the greatest left winger in the world.
It showed today that the Soviet team does have a definite edge in conditioning. And I think today with, as I said, the 3 games coming in a short period of time, it took more out of us. The first 2 games took more out of us than it did out of the Soviet team.
And one wonders how much Team Canada missed those 5 players who sat out. Victor Dombrovsky, a Russian referee, handled this game in Winnipeg, and the chippiness, which sprouted in Game 2, grew more prevalent. And so Winnipeg was the site of the highest scoring game of the series, 8-5. And now, after 3 games, the teams were all even. Vancouver welcomed the teams with 85-degree weather. And the Soviets seemed to be enjoying the newspaper accounts of their previous night's triumph, among other things. As we invade the privacy of Team Canada's dressing room prior to Game 4, you'll note Howe and Cheevers are back in the lineup. But Billy Harris stoutly defended his Game 3 substitutions.
My feelings are that each player, there's 27 players on the club, they've given up 6 weeks to this project. As far as the camp is concerned, some of them have given up 2.5 months preparing for the series, and I have an obligation as coach that each player is entitled to take part in the series. And if I had it to do over again, and I'd do exactly the same thing.
In the first period, Gordie Howe scored on a play that again featured passing and shooting par excellence. Stapleton to Mark Howe to Gordie, who beat Tretiak with a well-aimed shot, tying the score at 1-all. Big number 9 had just shown Tretiak and the world why he's professional hockey's all-time scoring champion. Team Canada beat Tretiak 4 more times within a span of 5 minutes, and still in the first period. 3 of the goals by Bobby Hull. That tied the score, 2-2. 3-2 for Canada. And with a Mahavlich goal just before this one, it was now 5-2. The high-powered Hull had been explosive in the earlier games as well. He now had 6 goals in 4 games, playing on a gimpy knee that would have sidelined a less competitive spirit. But Bobby'd missed one chance to play for Canada through no fault of his own, and he wasn't passing up this opportunity. Alexander Yakashev narrowed it to 5-3 in the second period. However, Team Canada seemed clearly in control of the game. But Polish referee Waldo Szczapek was having his problems. The play was getting unnecessarily rough. Either Szczapek didn't see all that was happening, or the international officiating standards differ greatly from what Canadian professionals are accustomed to. In the third period, number 19, Vladimir Shadrin, took a spear in the back of the knee. The referee missed that infraction, but at the very next opportunity, Shadrin retaliated with a slash against Johnny McKenzie. And off he went. This was typical. Missed the original offender, but penalized the offended retaliator. In any event, Team Canada seemed to forget about hockey. But the Soviets didn't. With less than 3 minutes to go, they scored twice. Alexander Maltsev, then Alexander Gusev. To escape with a 5-5 tie. Both teams could smile at the post-game banquet. The Soviets lucky to be returning to Russia on even terms after generally being outplayed in 3 of the 4 games in Canada. Team Canada happy to be even after 4 games when most people had given them so little chance. But the Soviets' dramatic comeback here in Vancouver had spoiled a night that otherwise belonged to the classy Bobby Hull.
It's been a terrific thrill for me. And I know that back a couple of years in the first series, some of we has-beens weren't allowed to play against the Soviet team, which we certainly would like to have done, because these fellows on our right here are just fantastic athletes, and I admire every one of them. And it's been a great experience for me, and I know that my wife and her mother, my mom and dad, will have a great time over in the Soviet Union. And again, I say it's been my extreme pleasure to play for Billy Harris and to represent Canada in one of the most fantastic experiences of my life. Thank you very much.
Finland was Team Canada's next stop. 8 days separated games 4 in Vancouver and 5 in Moscow. Team Canada, plus their wives and relatives, spent most of this time here in Helsinki, where they were hosted by Canada's ambassador, Cote, and his wife.
Paul Henderson, yes, glad to see you. You got any more last-minute tricks up your sleeve?
Oh, no, we'll still have to see.
The reference, of course, was to Henderson's 72 series heroics. In the meantime, here in Helsinki, Paul and others on Team Canada enjoyed Finland's world-famous saunas. And oh yes, they did play a tune-up game against a very outclassed Finnish national team. Team Canada won effortlessly 8-3. And one wonders if such an easy game helps or hinders when preparing to play against fellows like Yakashev, Kharlamov, and Tretiak. After the series, Team Canada stopped in Prague for an encounter with a very strong Czechoslovakian national team. Granted that this game came at a time when Team Canada was let down after a tough 8-game series. Nevertheless, the Czechs provided such a competitive challenge that one asks if Team Canada should have tuned up against this kind of opposition between games 4 and 5. Gothenburg was the site of Team Canada's other mid-series tune-up game. Facing the Swedish national team was a better test than the Finns. Team Canada triumphed 4-3, but without really extending themselves. In retrospect, one can't help but wonder about the overall effect of those 8 days and 2 games between Vancouver and Moscow. Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport. Game 5 is just over 24 hours away as Team Canada arrives to be greeted by Canada's ambassador to the USSR, Mr. Robert Ford. The Soviet ground crew personnel were anxious to get a glimpse of the arriving Canadians, as curious as the Canadians were about them and the Soviet Union. Several hours later, after laboriously clearing customs and immigration, and now too late to practice that day, Team Canada arrived at their downtown hotel, the Rossiya, the largest in Europe, which also housed Canadian fans who'd flown to Moscow to witness these final 4 games. Right on the Moscow River, this massive hotel is next to the Kremlin and Red Square, which unfortunately was under repair during this Canadian visit. Close by is St. Basil's Cathedral, probably the best-known landmark in the entire country. This awe-inspiring piece of architecture dates back to Tsar Ivan the Terrible. The next day, a 20-minute bus ride through historic Moscow, past the Bolshoi Ballet and Opera House, through Moscow's wide avenues, and along the Moscow River, delivered Team Canada to the Sports Palace, site of the 4 remaining games. Soviet broadcaster Nikolai Osarov arrives, as do several members of the Soviet team. The series was about to resume, here in a different world. The Soviet symbol of hospitality is a presentation of bread with salt. The pageantry of these customary opening ceremonies, the extra-wide ice surface, the Slavic faces, the clothes, especially the many, many uniforms, really make it abundantly clear that the USSR is a very different place from Canada. The chance to learn about our cultural differences is a bonus for all who take part in such an international series, be they participants or spectators. About 5 minutes into Game 5, and Alexander Maltsev got his first of 2 goals. As usual, the Soviets were forechecking strongly. And when Vikulov gains control of the puck, 3 Canadian players go after him, leaving Maltsev unchecked. Now let's look at some things which our cameras reveal about the Soviets' forechecking and their defensive strategy in general. They basically employ what they call their 2-1-2 system when forechecking. The wingers usually both go for the puck carrier. The center waits out in a deep slot position, ready to react to the play and in a potentially good scoring position should his wingers get the puck. The defensemen play a very interesting and key role because they will penetrate deeply into the Canadian end to attempt to check the play should it start to come out on their side. And when this happens, notice that the centerman's job is to fall back to cover up for the defenseman. Now, this happens occasionally in Canadian hockey, too. But in Soviet hockey, it happens with almost programmed regularity. Canadian coaches don't want their defensemen getting trapped up ice, leaving the opposition with a 3-on-2 or a 2-on-1. In traditional Canadian play, when 2 men go into forecheck, it's usually the 2 closest to the puck, with the 3rd man hanging back, just the same as the Soviet center does. But then, when the play comes out on one side or the other, this forward goes to check, not the defenseman, as in Soviet play. Now here's an example in Game 2 in Toronto, where the Soviet system breaks down, and it results in a Team Canada goal. The problem here occurs when the centerman forgets to cover for the checking defenseman. Johnny McKenzie tips the puck past, and it's Andre Lacroix and Bobby Hull, 2-on-1 for a goal. In the center zone, the Soviet centerman frequently turns around and skates backwards, the same as a defenseman, and plays at the head of a defensive triangle. The strategy is to angle the play toward either boards, and frequently it ends up that a defenseman and the center make the blue line stand, instead of the 2 defensemen, as in Canadian play. And the Soviet defenseman, who's away from the play, cuts in behind the blue line to act as a safety, ready to retrieve the puck should it be shot in. The Soviets are very proficient at using the boards, much as a boxer uses the ropes to cut down the ring and corner his opponent. Soviet players will angle the puck carrier into the boards and out of the skating room. This angling into the boards is usually done quite carefully, making absolutely certain that the man is squeezed out. The Russians are seldom interested in plastering a man into the boards, as so often happens in Canadian hockey. The hard-hitting tactic of the Canadian style has the advantage of being physically punishing, but it's also dangerous. Bad timing, and you can miss your check and/or the puck altogether. The Soviet system is not as intimidating, but it certainly can be frustrating. One other point about Soviet checking: seldom do they retreat to take a stand at the blue line, giving the other team center ice. The Soviets, to steal a basketball term, have a full-court press-on at all times. Witness Gordie Howe being badgered by 3 men here in center ice. Not big tactical differences, but things which, when well executed, force Team Canada to react and adjust. The same as playing under international officiating standards requires adjustment. Much was said about Waldo Chapek's refereeing of Game 5. But was he causing Team Canada problems? Or was it their failure to determine his standards and adjust to them? Billy Harris made this interesting statement at the time when he was choosing the team.
I have found over the years that for a hockey player to participate in international competition, he has to be mature, he has to be able to control his emotions. It's quite different than playing in your own continent and playing in your own league.
Team Canada's officials and players knew prior to this series that the Europeans had only recently switched to the 1 referee, 2 linesman system. They knew that their discretion and judgment, on penalties especially, would differ from what we're used to in our leagues. But under the white heat of international play, heads don't always stay cool.
I think the game tonight was quite chippy, and I think this comes about from inconsistent officiating by the amateur officials who I feel as part-time referees do a pretty good job.
Ralph Backstrom might disagree with his coach's assessment. Backstrom received a misconduct penalty when he complained about Valery Kalarmov going unpenalized after he kicked the feet out from under him.
The discretion of the ruling's a little different over here, but actually all the game is just puck control, and if you have puck control, you got the game, regardless of what kind of rules you have. But when you're losing, it's a little upsetting.
Puck control's the name of the game, spoken by a man who knows. And here comes Alexander Maltsev to pot his second goal of the evening as the Soviets won Game 5, 3-2, to take a one-game lead in the series. On their off days, Team Canada, as well as practicing, became tourists, taking in the sights. Souvenirs were a must. This is a state-operated Berezovka store, where only tourists are allowed to shop, and all purchases must be made with foreign currency. Wooden dolls and fur hats were favorite items.
Everybody who comes here in Moscow or Russian, he has to buy a hat to take home.
We wondered if Paul Henderson found Moscow any different this second time around.
Well, I really think there's a lot of difference. I think the number of cars in the street is unbelievable, and I think the clothes on the people, they're far more colorful, and I'm getting out and seeing the city, and I'm having a great time. We're far more relaxed, and everybody's having a great time this time. So win or lose, draw, we're having a good time.
Too good, perhaps. By contrast, the Soviet team had but one free day when they were in Canada. And that wasn't until after the 4 games were over and they were on their way home via Montreal. Denim jeans and jackets proved to be their favorite purchase. Back in Moscow again as Team Canada attends the official Canadian Embassy reception.
I've seen you on television.
We missed you in 72, by God.
Yes, indeed.
Those other guys didn't.
And after the hospitality of Ambassador and Mrs. Ford, it was off to the circus, leading one to ponder if all this extra activity was taking Team Canada's collective mind off its assigned mission. Certainly the players weren't eating, breathing, and sleeping hockey all the time they were in Moscow. On the other hand, they didn't plan this agenda for themselves. Game 6 started and finished on incidents revolving around Valery Kalarmov and Ricky Lee. Lee overskated the puck, and the ever-alert Kalarmov pounced on it, leading to a Soviet goal. In the third period, Kalarmov emerged from the penalty box just in time to split the defense and make the final score 5-2 for the Soviets.
I think, if you remember back to the first game, was the only game that he really put a burst of speed on and went between the defense and scored a goal on it, which was probably the nicest goal of the series. And it seems to take a little bit away from his game by passing around. In our system or our type of game, that Karmelov would be much more effective where we have an individual player than, say, a team game.
And as Game 6 ended, Karlamov and Ricky Lee met. The provocation, the retaliation, and the repercussions of this incident reverberated right back to the Canadian Senate. The Speaker is Boris Kalagin. According to Soviet law, criminal law, the Canadian player who started that fight and injured our player. According to our criminal code, he should be jailed for 15 days. We call such people persona non grata. In Canada, and later in the USSR, the Soviets' number 6, Valery Vasiliev, dealt out some tremendous body checks. And here, in Game 6, right after this check on Bruce McGregor, another altercation broke out.
According to my international rule book, the player that starts a fight, and a fight is when somebody starts swinging at the opponent, it reads 10-minute penalty. The referee had already called a 2-minute penalty on Vasiliev, which should have meant 12 minutes. McGregor did not throw a punch. At the worst, you get 5 minutes for retaliating. The call should have been 12 minutes for Vasiliev, 5 minutes for McGregor. Could somebody explain to me why it was 5 minutes apiece? Up to that point, it was a pretty good hockey game. Got a little chippy after that strange incident.
Again, we wonder if Team Canada wouldn't have met with more success if they'd adjusted their game style to referee Dombrowski, instead of allowing his inconsistencies and indecisiveness to get the better of them. Team Canada went to practice the next day, knowing they had to win both remaining games just to tie the series.
I think the Soviet hockey team has really done well, and I think we've got a lot to learn from them. I really do. They are a bit dirty, but they know what they're doing too. And I just wish our team would play their hockey, and they were doing a little bit of the others last night.
In the meantime, Boris Kalagin's boys enjoyed a brisk workout, knowing they needed only a tie to clinch the series. Watching intently were 50 Canadian amateur hockey coaches, a special tour group organized under the auspices of Hockey Canada and the CAHA, receiving full cooperation from the Soviet Ice Hockey Federation. These Canadian coaches got first-hand insights about what it takes to be a coach in the Soviet Union. They attended a special lecture at Moscow's renowned Institute of Physical Culture, and this practice session of the Red Army Bantam team. This is just one of the many exchanges of information ongoing now between Canada and other hockey nations. Communication fostered and encouraged by Hockey Canada. As we know, the Soviets make efficient use of what they call dry land training to condition their players. And often these fitness exercises are designed to simulate on-ice activities. For instance, that youngster looks to be stick handling with that heavy iron bar. This inventive technique of the Soviets to devise year-round training methods, such as these skiers jumping off a synthetic surface when snow isn't available, has no doubt helped them to attain such finely conditioned international sportsmen. Incidentally, this ski jump is located in the Lenin Hills, overlooking the Sports Palace, where this hockey series took place. And this vantage point is the favorite spot in all of Moscow for wedding party pictures. Game 7, do or die for Team Canada. And it proved to be a spectacular hockey match, perhaps the finest hour in the long and notable career of number 14, Ralph Backstrom, who scored 2 of Canada's 4 goals. Nobody gave more of himself in this series, game in and game out, than the 37-year-old Backstrom. But Vladislav Tretiak, as usual, was at his stingy best in the Russian goal. Just as back in Canada, Tretiak, wearing his familiar wire mask, earned Team Canada's total respect. Another Soviet who attracted more attention as the series wore on was number 13, Boris Mikhailov, scoring the Soviets' 4th goal here in Game 7. Earlier in Canada, Canada, Jerry Cheevers had demonstrated a marked dislike over Boris's tendency to lurk in his goal crease. But apparently their differences were settled in gentlemanly fashion. Mikhailov, their captain, was described by Team Canada players as the very heart of the Soviet team. As Game 7 drew towards its conclusion, attention was drawn to the fact that the clock had kept running for several seconds while the play was actually stopped. Now here comes the most controversial incident of the entire series. Bobby Hull scores. The puck is in the net. In fact, it's on its way out again. Here it is again in split screen. Notice the lights behind the goal. Neither the green to signal the end of the game nor the red to signal the goal is on, but the puck is definitely in the net. Now, by viewing a frame at a time, the green light comes on prior to the red. And referee Tom Brown ruled, in his best judgment, that the goal was scored after the conclusion of regulation time. To be fair, Brown made his call without the benefit of high-speed photography or a TV replay, and he called it as he saw it. But one can't help speculating about the effect of those valuable seconds that were lost when the clock was allowed to run during timeout. The final score was officially 4-4. The Soviets had won the series. In the 7 games, they'd outscored Canada 29-25. And this is a good time to look at the Soviet offensive strategies. They rely heavily on lightning speed counterattack as soon as they gain control of the puck. Here, Team Canada has the puck in their end, and the Soviet wingers certainly not covering the Canadian pointman closely. The Soviet wingers like to worry those defensemen about potential fast breakaways. Now, as soon as one of their defenders gets the puck, it's up ice almost in the same motion. Very, very seldom will you see the Soviets take the puck in behind their own goal to slow the play down and get set up, as you so often see Canadian clubs do. The Soviets also make many long cross-rink passes, a type of pass that Canadian hockey theorists consider quite dangerous because of the great possibility of interception. The Soviets like to make these long passes against the flow of play to catch the checkers going in the wrong direction. Here's why Canadian coaches think the long cross-rink pass is a no-no. You heard what Gordie Howe said earlier about puck control, and it's basic to the Russian game. Seldom ever will you see them shoot it in over the blue line. If their way is blocked to carry it in, they'll cut back, regroup, and try again. And the Soviet forwards have great flexibility of movement when on the attack. Left wingers come up on the right side and vice versa. And you'll often see the 3 Soviet forwards together over on one side of the rink, flooding a particular zone. And with their great passing skills, the manpower advantage they create in that flooded area is often enough to help them maintain possession and gain entry over the blue line, or an excellent scoring chance. Of course, the trademark of the Soviet attacking game is precision passing around the goal. Picture plays.
Well, I think the effect of this series will be similar to the effect of the series 2 years ago. I think when you have international matches, there is an exchange of tactical ideas, plus there's an exchange of training methods. And when you have 2 hockey teams representing 2 different countries with different ideas, then I think the game of hockey is improved and it's beneficial for the spectators.
Another off-day tour enjoyed by the visiting Canadian press and radio corps took them to the exhibition of economic achievement, where there were many interesting displays on the Soviet space program, Another field where the Russians are beginning to exchange information with the West as they prepare for joint space missions. Game 8 could not change the outcome of the series, but Jerry Cheevers did not let up. He played the way he'd played throughout. Both Cheevers and Tretiak played in 7 games in this series, with Jerry allowing 1 less goal, 24-25. It's not surprising that the Soviet players said Cheevers was the best goaltender they'd ever faced in international competition. This game was the final opportunity for Soviet fans to see Canadian hockey's living legend, Gordie Howe. Now in his 47th year, in a professional career that spanned almost 30 seasons, playing at this international level with his 2 sons, up against young men half his age. But he could still call on the skills and savvy that have made him the most revered player in the history of our game. But both teams had their big names. Yakushev, Hull, the series scoring leader, Karlamov, Backstrom, Tretiak, Cheevers, Vasiliev, Stapleton, Mikhailov, Howe. And every game had great moments of skill and finesse. For the most part, this series was a shining example to the youth of Canada, the USSR, and other hockey nations.
2 years ago, I was interviewed, and I felt the progress the Soviet hockey team has made over the last 10 years was almost frightening. And 2 years ago, I predicted within 5 years they'd be the champions of the world if they kept improving and coming up with great hockey players. But I have that much respect for the Soviet team. I feel they're probably the best hockey team in the world.
Here's what Coach Kulagin said after the series in the Soviet National Magazine. In my opinion, the Canadian team was just as strong as the National Hockey League team we saw in 1972. I understand that they are already talking in Canada about the need to form a combined NHL-WHA team for future series. It's ironic, you know. Hockey Canada was originally formed to help the development of our hockey and to see that Canada would be allowed to use her best players in international competitions so that our game and our country would be well and truly represented. Hockey Canada succeeded in opening that door, only to have it closed again by forces right in our own country. Wouldn't it be nice for hockey and Canada if we could get it all together for the next time around?